ally, it would work first to disrupt the alliance, sowing dissension, spreading rumors, courting one of the two sides with money, until the alliance fell apart. Then, Qin would invade first one of the two states, then the other. Gradually, bit by bit, it gobbled up neighboring states until, in the late 3rd century BC, it was able to unify China, a remarkable feat. To play the alliance game right, today as in ancient China, you must be realistic to the core, thinking far ahead and keeping the situation as fluid as possible. The ally of today may be the enemy of tomorrow. Sentiment has no place in the picture. If you are weak but clever, you can slowly leapfrog into a position of strength by bouncing from one alliance to another. The opposite approach is to make a key alliance and stick with it, valuing trust and an established relationship. This can work well in stable times, but in periods of flux, which are more common, it can prove to be your undoing. Differences in interest will inevitably emerge, and at the same time it will become hard to disentangle yourself from a relationship in which so much emotion has been invested. It is safer to bank on change, to keep your options open and your alliances based on need, not loyalty or shared values. In the golden age of Hollywood, actresses had almost the least amount of power of anyone. Careers were short. Even a great star would be replaced in a few years by someone younger. An actress would stay loyal to her studio, then watch helplessly as the roles dried up. The actress who best bucked the trend was Joan Crawford, who played her own version of the alliance game. In 1933, for instance, she met the screenwriter Joseph Mankiewicz, then a timid young man just starting out on what would be an illustrious career. Crawford recognized his talent immediately and went out of her way to befriend him, much to his amazement. He went on to write 9 screenplays for her, greatly lengthening her career. Crawford would also court cameramen and photographers, who would then work overtime to light her well and make her look good. She might do the same with the producer, who controlled a screenplay with the role in it she coveted. Crawford would often make alliances with up-and-coming young talent who valued a relationship with the star. Then she would gracefully break or forget the connection when it no longer served her needs. Nor would she stay loyal to the studio, or indeed to anyone, only to herself. Her unsentimental approach to her own shifting network of alliances allowed her to avoid the trap that most actresses found embedded in the system. The key to playing the game is to recognize who can best advance your interests at that moment. This need not be the most obviously powerful person on the scene, the person who seems to be able to do most for you. Alliances that meet specific needs or answer particular deficiencies are often more useful. Grand alliances between two great powers are generally the least effective. Because Louis XI had a weak army, the Swiss, though minor players on the European scene, were the allies he needed. Recognizing this years in advance, he cultivated an alliance that bewildered his enemies. As an ambitious young congressional assistant in Washington, Lyndon Johnson realized he lacked all kinds of powers and talents to get him to the top. He became a clever user of other people's talents. Realizing the importance of information in Congress, he made a point of befriending and allying himself with those at key positions, whether high or low, in the information chain. He was particularly good with older men who enjoyed the company of a lively young man and the role of the father figure giving advice. Slowly, from being a poor kid from Texas with no connections, Johnson raised himself to the top through his network of convenient alliances. It is a common strategy in bicycle races not to go out in front, but to stay right behind the leader, a position that cuts down wind resistance. The leader faces the wind for you and saves you energy. At the last minute, you sprint ahead. Letting other people cut resistance for you and waste their energy on your behalf is the height of economy and strategy. One of the best stratagems in the alliance game is to begin by seeming to help another person in some cause or fight, only for the purpose of furthering your own interests in the end. It is easy to find such people. They have a glaring need, a temporary weakness that you can help them to overcome. Now you have put them under a subtle obligation to you, to use as you will, to dominate their affairs, to divert their energies in the direction you desire. The emotions you create with your offer of help will blind the other person to your ulterior purpose. The artist Salvador Dali was particularly adept at this version of the game. If someone needed to raise money, say, Dali would come to the rescue, organizing a charity ball or other fundraising event. The person in need could hardly resist. Dali was friendly with royalty, Hollywood stars, socialites. Soon he would be ordering all kinds of elaborate props for the ball. For his infamous Night in a Surrealist Forest in Pebble Beach, California in 1941, which was intended to benefit starving artists in war-torn Europe, Dali requested a live giraffe, enough pine trees to create a fake forest, the largest bed in the world, a wrecked automobile, and thousands of pairs of shoes from which to serve the first course. In the end, the party was a smash and got all kinds of publicity, but as so often with Dali, the bills far exceeded the receipts. No money was left over for the starving artists of Europe. And strangely enough, all of the publicity was focused on Dali, increasing his fame and winning him more powerful allies. A variation of the alliance game is to play the mediator, the center around which other powers pivot. While remaining covertly autonomous, you make those around you fight for your allegiance. This was essentially how Prince Clemens von Metternich, the Austrian foreign minister during the Napoleonic era and afterward, restored Austria as Europe's principal power. It helped that Austria is located in the center of Europe and so is strategically vital to the nations around it. Even during the reign of Napoleon, when Austria was at its weakest and Metternich had to cozy up to the French, he kept his country free of lasting entanglements. Without bonding Austria to France by any legal alliance, for example, he tied Napoleon to him emotionally by arranging for the emperor to marry into the Austrian royal family. Keeping all of the great powers, England, France, Russia, at arm's length, he made everything revolve around Austria, even though Austria itself was no longer a great military power. The brilliance of this variation is that merely by assuming a central position, you can wield tremendous power. For instance, you place yourself at a critical point in the information chain, giving you access to and control over it. Or you produce something other people depend on, giving you incredible leverage. Or you play the mediator everyone needs to resolve a dispute. Whatever it is, you can maintain power in this central position only by keeping yourself unentangled and courted by all. The moment you enter into any kind of lasting alliance, your power is greatly reduced. A key component of the alliance game is the ability to manipulate other people's alliances and even destroy them, sowing dissension among your opponents so that they fight among themselves. Breaking your enemy's alliances is as good as making alliances yourself. When Hernán Cortés landed in Mexico in 1519, he faced hundreds of thousands of Aztecs with 500 men. Knowing that many smaller Mexican tribes resented the powerful Aztec Empire, he slowly worked to peel them away from their alliances with the Aztecs. By filling a tribal leader's ears with horrible stories about the Aztec emperor's plans, for example, he might bait the man into arresting the Aztec envoys on their next visit. That, of course, would infuriate the emperor, and now the tribe would be isolated and in danger, and would appeal to Cortés for protection. On and on Cortés went with this negative version of the alliance game, until the Aztecs' allies had become his. Your focus here is on stirring up mistrust. Make one partner suspicious of the other. Spread rumors. Cast doubts on people's motives. Be friendly to one ally to make the other jealous. Divide and conquer. In this way, you will create a tide of emotions, hitting first this side, then that, until the alliance totters. Now, former members of the alliance will feel vulnerable. Through manipulation or outright invitation, make them turn to you for protection. In facing an enemy that is composed of allies, no matter how large or formidable, do not be afraid. As Napoleon said, "Give me allies to fight." In war, allies generally have problems of command and control. The worst kind of leadership is divided leadership. Compelled to debate and agree before they act, Allied generals usually move like snails. When fighting large groups of allies, as he often did, Napoleon always attacked first the weak link, the junior partner. Collapse here could make the whole fabric of the alliance fall apart. He would also seek quick victory in battle, even a small one, for no force is more easily discouraged by a defeat than an allied one. Finally, you will of course be attacked for playing the alliance game. People will accuse you of being feckless, amoral, treacherous. Remember, these charges are strategic themselves. They are part of a moral offensive. See Chapter 25. To advance their own interests, your accusers are trying to make you feel guilty or look bad. Do not let them get to you. The only real danger is that your reputation will eventually keep people from making alliances with you. But self-interest rules the world. If you are seen to have benefited others in the past and is capable of doing the same in the present, you will have suitors and playing partners. Besides, you are loyal and generous as long as there is mutual need. And when you show that you cannot be had by the false lure of permanent loyalty and friendship, you will actually find yourself treated with greater respect. Many will be drawn to your realistic and spirited way of playing the game. Reversal. If you play the alliance game, so will those around you, and you cannot take their behavior personally. You must keep dealing with them. But there are some types with whom any kind of alliance will harm you. You can often recognize them by their over-eagerness to pursue you. They will make the first move, trying to blind you with alluring offers and glittering promises. To protect yourself from being used in a negative way, always look at the tangible benefits you will gain from this alliance. If the benefits seem vague or hard to realize, think twice about joining forces. Look at your prospective allies' past for signs of greed or of using people without giving in return. Be wary of people who speak well, have apparently charming personalities, and talk about friendship, loyalty, and selflessness. They are most often con artists trying to prey on your emotions. Keep your eye on the interests involved on both sides, and never let yourself be distracted from them. Here are further reflections on the alliance strategy. From Aesop's Fables. The Dog, the Cock, and the Fox. A dog and a cockerel, having made friends, were strolling along a road together. As evening fell, the cockerel flew up into a tree to sleep there, and the dog went to sleep at the foot of the tree, which was hollow. According to his habit, the cockerel crowed just before daybreak. This alerted a fox nearby, who ran up to the tree and called up to the cockerel, "Do come down, sir, for I dearly wish to embrace a creature who could have such a beautiful voice as you." The cockerel said, "I shall come down as soon as you awaken the doorkeeper, who is asleep at the foot of the tree." Then, as the fox went to look for the doorkeeper, the dog pounced briskly on him and tore him to pieces. This fable teaches us that sensible men, when their enemies attack them, divert them to someone better able to defend them than they are themselves. From The Discourses by Niccolò Machiavelli. Since in all her decisions, whether by chance or by choice, Rome took all steps necessary to make herself great, she did not overlook fraud. She could not at the start have been more deceitful than she was in the means she took, as we were saying just now, to acquire allies, since under this title she made them all her servants, as was the case with the Latins and other peoples round about. For she first availed herself of their arms in order to subjugate neighboring peoples, and to build up her reputation as a state, and then having subdued them, She increased to such an extent that she could beat anyone. Nor would the Latins ever have realized that in reality they were mere slaves if they had not seen the Samnites twice defeated and forced to accept Rome's terms. From the I Ching. 6 in the third place means he finds a comrade. Now he beats the drum. Now he stops. Now he sobs. Now he sings. Here the source of a man's strength lies not in himself, but in his relation to other people. No matter how close to them he may be, if his center of gravity depends on them, he is inevitably tossed to and fro between joy and sorrow. Rejoicing to high heaven, then sad unto death. This is the fate of those who depend upon an inner accord with other persons whom they love. From Aesop's Fables. The Fox and the Billy Goat. A fox, having fallen into a well, was faced with the prospect of being stuck there. But then a billy goat came along to that same well because he was thirsty and saw the fox. He asked him if the water was good. The fox decided to put a brave face on it and gave a tremendous speech about how wonderful the water was down there, so very excellent. So the billy goat climbed down the well, thinking only of his thirst. When he had a good drink, he asked the fox what he thought was the best way to get back up again. The fox said, "Well, I have a very good way to do that. Of course, it will mean our working together. If you just push your front feet up against the wall and hold your horns up in the air as high as you can, I will climb up onto them, get out, and then I can pull you up behind me." The billy goat willingly consented to this idea, and the fox briskly clambered up the legs, the shoulders, and finally the horns of his companion. He found himself at the mouth of the well, pulled himself out, and immediately scampered off. The billy goat shouted after him, reproaching him for breaking their agreement of mutual assistance. From the Greek Myths by Robert Graves. Heracles had performed these 10 labors in the space of 8 years and 1 month. But Eurystheus, discounting the 2nd and the 5th, set him 2 more. The 11th labor was to fetch fruit from the golden apple tree, Mother Earth's wedding gift to Hera, with which she had been so delighted that she planted it in her own divine garden. This garden lay on the slopes of Mount Atlas, where the panting chariot horses of the sun complete their journey, and where Atlas's sheep and cattle, 1,000 herds of each, wander over their undisputed pastures. When Hera found one day that Atlas's daughters, the Hesperides, to whom she had entrusted the tree, were pilfering the apples, she set the ever-watchful dragon Ladon to coil around the tree as its guardian. When at last Heracles came to the Po, the river nymphs, daughters of Zeus and Themis, showed him Nereus asleep. He seized the hoary old sea god, and clinging to him despite his many protean changes, forced him to prophesy how the golden apples could be won. Nereus had advised Heracles not to pluck the apples himself, but to employ Atlas as his agent, meanwhile relieving him of his fantastic burden. Therefore, on arriving at the garden of the Hesperides, he asked Atlas to do him this favor. Atlas would have undertaken almost any task for the sake of an hour's respite, but he feared Ladon, whom Heracles thereupon killed with an arrow shot over the garden wall. Heracles now bent his back to receive the weight of the celestial globe, and Atlas walked away, returning presently with 3 apples plucked by his daughters. He found the sense of freedom delicious. "I will take these apples to Eurystheus myself without fail," he said, "if you hold up the heavens for a few moments longer." Heracles pretended to agree, but having been warned by Nereus not to accept any such offer, begged Atlas to support the globe for only 1 moment more, while he put a pad on his head. Atlas, easily deceived, laid the apples on the ground and resumed his burden, whereupon Heracles picked them up and went away with an ironical farewell. From The Secret Life of Salvador Dali, by Salvador Dali. I regarded most of the people I met solely and exclusively as creatures I could use as porters in my voyages of ambition. Almost all these porters sooner or later became exhausted. Unable to endure the long marches that I forced on them at top speed and under all climatic conditions, they died on the way. I took others. To attach them to my service, I promised to get them to where I myself was going, to that end station of glory which climbers desperately want to reach. From Aesop's Fables. The Lion and the Wild Ass. A lion and a wild ass entered into an agreement to hunt wild beasts together. The lion was to use his great strength, while the ass would make use of his greater speed. When they had taken a certain number of animals, the lion divided up the spoils into 3 portions. "I'll take the first share because I am the king," he said. "The second share will be mine because I have been your partner in the chase," he said. "As for the third share," he said to the wild ass, "this share will be a great source of harm to you, believe me, if you do not yield it up to me. And by the way, get lost." It is suitable always to calculate your own strength, and not to enter into an alliance with people stronger than yourself. And lastly, from The Wiles of War, 36 Military Strategies from Ancient China. The state of Jin, located in modern Shanxi, grew steadily in strength by swallowing small neighbors. There were 2 small states, Hu and Yu, to its south. In the spring of the 19th year under King Hui of Zhou, 658 BC, Duke Xian of Jin sent for a trusted minister, Shun Shi, and declared his intention to attack Hu. "We have little chance to gain advantage," observed Shun Shi after a pause. "Hu and Yu have always been very close. When we attack one of them, the other will surely come to its rescue. Pitched 1 to 1, neither of them is our match, but the result is far from certain if we fight both of them at the same time." "Surely you are not saying we have no way to cope with these 2 small states?" asked the Duke. Shunshi thought for a while before replying. "I have thought up a plan by which we will be able to subdue both Hu and Yu. For the first step, we should present the Duke of Yu with handsome gifts and ask him to lend us a path by which we can attack Hu." The Duke asked, "But we have just offered gifts to Hu and signed a friendly agreement with it. We can hardly make Yu believe that we want to attack Hu instead of Yu itself." "That is not so difficult to work out," replied Shunqi. "We may secretly order our men on the border to make raids on Hu. When the men of Hu come to protest, we may use that as a pretext to attack them. In this way, Yu will be convinced of our professed intention." The Duke considered it a good plan. Before long, armed conflicts broke out along the Jin-Hu border to the south. Thereupon the Duke asked, "Now we have good reason to convince Yu of our intention to attack Hu. But it will not lend the path to us unless it receives a good profit in return. So what shall we use to bribe the Duke of Yu?" Shunshi replied, "Though the Duke of Yu is known to be very greedy, he will not be moved unless our gifts are extremely precious. So why not offer him fine horses from Q and jade from Chuji?" The Duke looked reluctant. "But these are the best treasures I have. I can hardly bring myself to part with them." "I am not surprised by your doubts," said Shunshi. "Nevertheless, we are bound to subdue Hu now that it has lost the shield of Yu. After Hu is conquered, Yu will not be able to survive on its own. Therefore, when you send these gifts to the Duke of Yu, you are simply consigning the jade to your external mansion and the horses to your external stable." When Shunshi was ushered into the court of Yu and presented the gifts, the Duke of Yu's eyes bulged. "The men of Hu have repeatedly worked up disturbances along our border," said Shunshi. "To protect our people from the calamity of war, we have exerted the highest restraint and concluded a peace treaty with Hu. Nevertheless, the impudent Hu takes our restraint for weakness and is now creating new troubles by making invidious charges against us. Therefore, my lord was compelled to order a punitive expedition against Hu, and he dispatched me to ask your permission to let our troops pass through your land. This way, we can get around our border with Hu, where its defense is strong, and launch a surprise attack at its weak point. When we have defeated the men of Hu, we shall present you with splendid trophies to testify to our mutual alliance and friendship. That summer, the Jin troops attacked Hu by way of Yu. The Duke of Yu led a band of force in person to join in the expedition. They defeated the Hu army and captured Jiayang, one of Hu's 2 major cities. The Duke of Yu received his share of the booty and believed he had nothing to regret for. In autumn of the 22nd year, under King Hui of Zhou, 655 BC, the Duke of Jin again sent an envoy to borrow a path from Yu to Hu, and again the Duke of Yu gave his consent. In the 8th month, the Duke of Jin led 600 war chariots and proceeded by way of Yu to attack Hu. They laid siege to Shangyang, the capital of Hu. The city, after holding out for nearly 4 months, finally yielded. The Duke of Hu fled, and Hu as a feudal state was destroyed. On their way back, the Jin troops halted at Yu. The Duke of Yu came to welcome them, receiving the Duke of Jin into the capital. The Jin troops seized the chance to storm into the city. Taken totally off guard, the Yu army submitted with little resistance, and the Duke of Yu was taken prisoner. Duke Xian of Jin was extremely pleased when Shunxi returned to present him with the horses and jade as well as the captured Duke of Yu. Chapter 28. Give your rivals enough rope to hang themselves. The one-upmanship strategy. Life's greatest dangers often come not from external enemies, but from our supposed colleagues and friends who pretend to work for the common cause while scheming to sabotage us and steal our ideas for their gain. Although in the court in which you serve you must maintain the appearance of consideration and civility, you also must learn to defeat these people. Work to instill doubts and insecurities in such rivals, getting them to think too much and act defensively. Bait them with subtle challenges that get under their skin, triggering an overreaction, and embarrassing mistake. The victory you are after is to isolate them, make them hang themselves through their own self-destructive tendencies, leaving you blameless and clean. The art of one-upmanship. Throughout your life, you will find yourself fighting on 2 fronts. First is the external front, your inevitable enemies. But second, and less obvious, is the internal front, your colleagues and fellow courtiers, many of whom will scheme against you, advancing their own agendas at your expense. The worst of it is that you will often have to fight on both fronts at once, facing your external enemies while also working to secure your internal position, an exhausting and debilitating struggle. The solution is not to ignore the internal problem, you will have a short life if you do so, or to deal with it in a direct and conventional manner, by complaining, acting aggressively, or forming defensive alliances. Understand, internal warfare is by nature unconventional. Since people theoretically on the same side usually do their best to maintain the appearance of being team players working for the greater good, complaining about them or attacking them will only make you look bad and isolate you. Yet at the same time, you can expect these ambitious types to operate underhandedly and indirectly. Outwardly charming and cooperative, behind the scenes they are manipulative and slippery. You need to adopt a form of warfare suited to these nebulous yet dangerous battles which go on every day. And the unconventional strategy that works best in this arena is the art of one-upmanship. Developed by history's savviest courtiers, it is based on 2 simple premises. First, your rivals harbor the seeds of their own self-destruction. And second, a rival who is made to feel defensive and inferior, however subtly, will tend to act defensive and inferior to his or her detriment. People's personalities often form around weaknesses, character flaws, uncontrollable emotions. People who feel needy, or who have a superiority complex, or are afraid of chaos, or desperately want order, will develop a personality, a social mask, to cover up their flaws and make it possible for them to present a confident, pleasant, responsible exterior to the world. But the mask is like the scar tissue covering a wound. Touch it the wrong way, and it hurts. Your victim's responses start to go out of control. They complain, act defensive and paranoid, or show the arrogance they try so hard to conceal. For a moment, the mask falls. When you sense you have colleagues who may prove dangerous, or are actually already plotting something, you must try first to gather intelligence on them. Look at their everyday behavior, their past actions, their mistakes, for signs of their flaws. With this knowledge in hand, you are ready for the game of one-upmanship. Begin by doing something to prick the underlying wound, creating doubt, insecurity, and anxiety. It might be an offhand comment or something that your victims sense as a challenge to their position within the court. Your goal is not to challenge them blatantly, though, but to get under their skin. They feel attacked but are not sure why or how. The result is a vague, troubling sensation. A feeling of inferiority creeps in. You then follow up with secondary actions that feed their doubts. Here, it is often best to work covertly, getting other people, the media, or simple rumor to do the job for you. The end game is deceptively simple. Having piled up enough self-doubt to trigger a reaction, you stand back and let the target self-destruct. You must avoid the temptation to gloat or get in a last blow. At this point, in fact, it is best to act friendly, even offering dubious assistance and advice. Your target's reaction will be an overreaction. Either they will lash out, make an embarrassing mistake, or reveal themselves too much, or they will get overly defensive and try too hard to please others, working all too obviously to secure their position and validate their self-esteem. Defensive people unconsciously push people away. At this point, your opening action, especially if it is only subtly aggressive, will be forgotten. What will stand out will be your rival's overreaction and humiliation. Your hands are clean, your reputation unsullied. Their loss of position is your gain. You are one up and they are one down. If you had attacked them directly, your advantage would be temporary or non-existent. In fact, your political position would be precarious. Your pathetic, suffering rivals would win sympathy as your victims, and attention would focus on you as responsible for their undoing. Instead, they must fall on their swords. You may have given them a little help, but to whatever extent possible in their own eyes, and certainly in everyone else's, they must have only themselves to blame. That will make their defeat doubly galling and doubly effective. To win without your victims knowing how it happened, or just what you have done, is the height of unconventional warfare. Master the art, and not only will you find it easier to fight on two fronts at the same time, but your path to the highest ranks will be that much smoother. By Napoleon Bonaparte. Never interfere with an enemy that is in the process of committing suicide. Historical examples. 1. John A. McClernand, 1812 to 1900, watched with envy as his friend and fellow lawyer Abraham Lincoln rose to the U.S. presidency. McClernand, a lawyer and congressman from Springfield, Illinois, had had this ambition himself. Shortly after the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, he resigned his congressional seat to accept a commission as a brigadier general in the Union Army. He had no military experience, but the Union needed leadership of any kind it could get. And if he proved himself in battle, he could rise fast. He saw this Army position as his path to the presidency. McClernand's first post was at the head of a brigade in Missouri under the overall command of General Ulysses S. Grant. Within a year, he was promoted to Major General, still under Grant. But this was not good enough for McClernand, who needed a stage for his talents, a campaign to run and get credit for. Grant had talked to him of his plans for capturing the Confederate fort at Vicksburg on the Mississippi River. The fall of Vicksburg, according to Grant, could be the turning point in the war. McClernand decided to sell a march on Vicksburg as his own idea and use it as a springboard for his career. In September 1862, on leave in Washington, D.C., McClernand paid a visit to President Lincoln. He was tired of furnishing brains for Grant's army, he said. He had proved himself on the battlefield and was a better strategist than Grant, who was a little too fond of his whiskey. McClernand proposed to go back to Illinois, where he was well known and could recruit a large army. Then he would follow the Mississippi River south to Vicksburg and capture the fort. Vicksburg was technically in Grant's department, but Lincoln was not sure the general could lead the audacious attack necessary. He took McClernand to see Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, another former lawyer, who commiserated with his two visitors on the difficulties of dealing with military brass. Stanton listened to and liked McClernand's plan. That October, the one-time congressman left Washington with confidential orders giving him approval for his march on Vicksburg. The orders were a little vague, and Grant was not informed of them, but McClernand would make the best of them. McClernand quickly recruited more soldiers than he had promised Lincoln he would. He sent his recruits to Memphis, Tennessee, where he would soon join them to march on Vicksburg. But when he arrived in Memphis in late December 1862,